guys set? Welcome back to school, everybody. I hope you all had a good summer vacation. We're going to start the commission meeting, so I'd like to call it to order. Secretary Burgess, are there any other items?
There are no changes to the agenda this morning.
Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll move then to the regular agenda, and the first and actually only item for discussion today is item 201, which is case number 13M0026 et al. And it's proceeding to determine what adjustments should be made to certain National Grid affiliates' rates or earnings based on a forensic audit. Judge Presterman will be presenting today, and I believe then we also have Joe Lochner will be supplementing. So thank you. Judge?
Thank you, Chair Zibelman. Good morning, Commissioners. The draft order you have before you in this case, if adopted, would approve the terms of a joint proposal entered into between the department staff and National Grid in May of this year. And it would bring to a close the Commission's investigation of financial and rate issues associated with the allocation of costs by National Grid from its service companies to its New York utilities, specifically during the 2008 to 2010 time period. Under the terms of the joint proposal, National Grid would create credit accounts in the amount of $24.75 million for the benefit of the customers of its downstate gas utilities, $11.4 million for the customers of Keyspan Energy Delivery Long Island, and $13.3 million for the customers of Keyspan Energy Delivery New York. Those accounts would be established upon approval of the order and would immediately begin earning a return for investors and would immediately be available for disposition by the Commission for the benefit of ratepayers. This case actually had its genesis back in 2010 when staff's review of a electric rate filing by Niagara Mohawk, National Grid's upstate electric utility, raised a number of concerns about whether or not excess costs were being allocated to Niagara Mohawk Electric by the National Grid service companies. Those concerns prompted the Commission to authorize the issuance of a request for proposals to hire an auditor to examine the practices and procedures of National Grid in making those service company allocations. And the Commission at the same time established a separate case, 10M0451, to consider the results of that audit. In February of 2011, Overland Consulting was selected as the auditor to conduct the study. In the meantime, in that rate case that precipitated this effort, the Commission set rates, but in order to protect ratepayers pending the outcome of the audit, the Commission made $50 million in rates, temporary and subject to refund. Overland ultimately issued its report in October of 2011. The methodology it utilized to examine the cost allocation procedures of National Grid essentially involved taking a random sample of the cost allocation transactions, examining the documentation of the transactions to determine whether the allocations had been made properly to the proper utility in the proper amount in the proper account, and whether they were adequately documented. Once they had determined the results of the sample, they extrapolated the dollar amount of what they considered to be improperly allocated transactions to the total population of transactions to come up with an estimate of what might have been the total amount over allocated to a particular utility. Their study focused on the 2009 rate years of each of the utilities, and it came up with an estimate of as much as $44 million over allocated to the utilities. The results were statistically tested by establishing a confidence interval around the estimate within which it could be said that there was a 95% probability that the actual number fell, much like the polls we see in every election where it's 50% for so-and-so plus or minus 3%, meaning it could be 47, it could be 53. So there was a confidence interval, and those were fairly large. And in the case of Niagara Mohawk Electric, it actually did not preclude the possibility that there might have been an under-allocation rather than an over-allocation. But in the case of the other utilities, it indicated the probability was that there had been an over-allocation. In addition, Overland made one other finding that $11.2 million in costs that had been included in the rates in case 10E0050 might not have been recurring. In other words, they were in the costs incurred by the company during the historic test year, but Overland felt that they would not recur during the rate year for which rates were being set, and therefore should not have been included in rates. National Grid vigorously disputed the results of the audit in comments they filed subsequently. National Grid contended that virtually all of the transactions, when properly examined, were for proper utility purposes and could be adequately documented. They concluded that misallocations far from $44 million, as Overland suggested, would net to only about $175,000, or about 0.02% of the total transactions. So to sort out this dispute, the Commission established another case, and that is the 13M0026. In that case, the Commission directed staff to review the audit process thoroughly and to determine whether there was a need to adjust rates or to adjust the credits that customers were entitled to under earnings sharing mechanisms in effect with some of the National Grid utilities. And it also extended the inquiry from the 2009 year that had been the focus of Overland to the preceding and subsequent years, 2008 and 2010. The Commission particularly directed staff to focus on the transactions that Overland had found to be unsupported, meaning that it did not reach a conclusion as to whether the transaction was proper or not, but merely that there was insufficient documentation from National Grid for it to make a determination. Those unsupported transactions in dollar terms were by far the majority of the misallocated costs. Staff did, in fact, perform an extensive review. It took a long time. It was a very difficult discovery process, but eventually staff got the information it needed and made a number of key findings. First, it found that National Grid was able to document about 60% of the transactions, 22 of 36 of the transactions that Overland had found to be unsupported. It also concluded that a slight modification was necessary to Overland's sampling methodology in order to make it consistent with the statistical processes it applied. And staff found that the $11.2 million included in Niagara Mohawk Electric rates was in fact properly included in rates and that no adjustment was required for that. Applying its findings concerning the sampling and the methodology, staff recalculated the overcharge estimates for 2009. It extrapolated those results then to the years 2008 and 2010, adjusted for statistical uncertainty, and came up with new estimates of the total amount that was owed to ratepayers due to misallocated service company costs. The numbers staff calculated are the credits that are included in the joint proposal. National Grid accepted the results of staff's analysis for purposes of entering into a joint proposal. The joint proposal, if approved, would therefore conclude the investigation ordered by the Commission in 13M0026. The rates made temporary in 10E0050 would become permanent and no longer subject to refund. And all issues in the audit case 10M0451 would be resolved except for the ongoing implementation of recommendations made by Overland concerning the implementation of accounting systems and controls. Given the divergence of initial positions, 175,000 versus 44 million, I think the result of the joint proposal is clearly within the range of reasonable outcomes that might have been expected through litigation. And it would have been litigation that would likely have been extensive and expensive and required additional audits as a part of the discovery process. The result is in that the joint proposal accepts essentially what would have been staff's initial litigating position had it had to go forward. I think it can be said that the result is clearly fair to ratepayers. It is also fair to National Grid. It gives them credit for the transactions that were demonstrated to be proper through staff's analysis. And it eliminates any lingering earnings uncertainty associated with the existence of temporary rates and ongoing litigation. So I think a commendable job, a very commendable job was done by all the parties in this case, and particularly staff. The joint proposal is fair and reasonable and in the public interest and deserves approval. That's my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Lochner, did you have anything to add at this time?
No, I think that's a good summary of it.
Well, thank you, Judge Pesterman. I agree that I'm really appreciative of the work that staff has done here. I just want to add just an editorial note. While I do think it's always a good idea to avoid litigation that you can avoid, certainly I know that our counsel would be more than happy to go litigate if they didn't think that the result was the right result. So I think that the avoidance of litigation risk is simply, in this instance, was because staff put together such a powerful position that it made sense to everybody to accept their position, and I applaud the work of the Doris is your group, I know, in getting this done. So thank you very much. In terms of the settlement, I also noted that the City of New York signed on to the joint proposal. So I assume they also looked at this and made a determination that this result was a very good result for the city.
Yeah, they did not sign the joint proposal, but they submitted comments in support, and they were particularly pleased that these credit accounts would be available for disposition by the Commission if a rate case is filed in the near future.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. The other piece that I think is helpful to note, and perhaps either Judge Presterman or Mr. Lochner, you want to elaborate on this, is that the underlying problems that we're dealing with here are something that I'm assuming have been either rectified or staff is looking at to make sure we're not having continuing concerns around misallocations. And if you wanted to speak to a little bit to what's happening since then, because I think it's just as critical to the Commission.
Yes. There was a rate case that occurred with historic year of 2011, and the company submitted testimony of an outside auditor, Ernst & Young, where they did an audit of the service company charges to determine if they were properly charged to our utilities, particularly Niagara Mohawk. And we examined their work papers, but we also trial staff, performed their own examination of a random sample of transactions and examined the allocation of charges over the historic past to determine if there were similar situations that occurred back in the 2010 rate case. And we didn't see those circumstances, and we didn't see the undocumented or the questionable transactions that we saw in the past that alerted us to having to be in the audit. So in that respect, we felt more comfortable that the company had become aware of the issues and was solving those problems. But beyond that, in that rate proceeding and the rate plan that came out of it, we created several protections that are operating right now. The first rate year that the company completed, March of 2014, the company again had to submit an audit from an outside auditor of their service company charge allocations. We received that in July. Staff is ripping that apart. It's going to review the work papers. And again, we have to look at actual transactions. That's the only way you can do this, is verifying that actual transactions that come through the bill are properly accounted for and allocated with necessary support. That's one thing we're doing. We're also examining in that situation the fact that they've moved now to a one service company with one allocation methodology that occurred back in 2012, and that will be looked at in the situation too. So we're following up on those elements. We're also reviewing their management audit recommendations that came out of the Overland audit. They've said they completed 7 of them. We've signed off on 4, but there's others that have to be, we still need to do review work and make sure we agree with them. Their monthly review of bills. One thing the company was not doing was actually looking at their monthly charges that were coming through, looking at the actual transactions being allocated to them. This is their largest vendor, and they didn't look at the bill because it came from their affiliate. Now they are. Every month they have a review of their actual bill, and our staff are reviewing the work papers supporting their monthly review of their service company bill. So these are some of the things we're doing. I think it's important that we continue to have this oversight and audit of the company's transactions with their affiliate.
Thank you. This is sort of the Ronald Reagan form of government, Commissioner Berman. It's just trust but verify. So, but I'd like to. First of all, I think I'm glad you're doing that because I think it's really important. Having affiliates and having these group companies are terrific from the standpoint of synergies and getting expertise that's broader than we could do in this state. But at the same time, it is our need to make certain that our consumers are being charged the right rates, the right amounts. And I know this is a continuing work on the part of staff, not just on terms of National Grid, but on other companies we regulate that are part of holding company structures. And I appreciate the work and the learnings, and I think it will need to be a continuing effort in that regard. So thank you. I think that the joint proposal is clearly a fair one. It certainly is in the interest of consumers because it gets the credits back to the customers where they belong, and I'm prepared to vote for it. I'll take any other questions or comments at this time for staff. Any of the other commissioners? Commissioner Berman?
Thank you. I think it's very good to see staff working on these issues and the importance of management audits and the lessons learned and looking at the takeaways and the elements that were learned from the management audits and going forward how to apply them in future cases and other management audits. So I look forward to hearing about this and seeing how it works in other management audits as well. So thank you.
Commissioner Akinpora? Commissioner Brown?
I'll just say thank you. You really did a good job. Just when we think we have the management audit tool fine-tuned, we find that there's always more to learn. So we thank you for all your efforts, and this was a good outcome. Thank you.
I could see that it was a heck of a lot of work by staff to come to this result. An awful lot of digging, an awful lot of sweat, and a result that was so strong that basically everybody who looked at it said, oh, okay, and caved. Nice job.
Thank you. In that case, with no further comments, all those in favor of the recommendations to adopt the terms of the joint proposal that's going to bring to a conclusion the financial and rate issues associated with the investigation into concerns about National Grid's past practices for the allocation of costs from service companies to its regulated New York affiliates, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There being no opposition, the recommendation is adopted. Thank you, Judge Prestman and Mr. Lochner. That was great. We'll now move to the consent agenda. With respect to the consent agenda, is there any commissioner who wants to recuse or abstain from voting on any of the items? Hearing none. Any comments on any of the commissioners on any of the items in the consent agenda? We're good? We're good? We're good? Okay. So in that case, let's just go to a vote. All those in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There being no opposition, the recommendations are adopted. Secretary Burgess, are there any other matters before us today?
There are no other matters today, and the next commission session is on October 2nd at 10:30.
Okay, great. Thank you.